Jeffrey Epstein fucking left paper trails all over the planet. Jeffrey Epstein's paper trail is 1,000 miles long. It's not that we don't know what he was doing. It's that we have a giant government that's just putting their hands over their eyes and their hands in their ears and pretending that they don't fucking see it.
We see our own financial picture going more and more into the and then we see this weird agreement where why are we giving you $3 or $4 billion a year without question for 20 years on end, without oversight, without being allowed to criticize or ask where it's going?
The uncomfortable truth is that mostly the problem is the network of American Jews that are supporting the government of Israel, because as American Jews, they have rights that Israeli politicians don't have. And so when Bill Ackman, an American Jew, decides to take action on behalf of Israel, he's an American and he has every right to spend his money in this way. People like Benjamin Netanyahu openly said on camera that the propaganda war is the most important front of Israel's now 4,000 front war.
You have to cut that infection out of your arm and repair it, and the body will be fine. Mr. Ian Carroll, this has been a conversation I've been looking forward to. You're the man that you know a lot about a lot of things. I would call you this generation's conspiratorial mastermind. And so I'm curious, first of all, I'm just curious from a perspective of what do you do all day? How much research are you doing? Give me the behind the scenes in your operation.
These days, my all day is, it's sort of is constant because I love it and it's super fun. Mm-hmm. And there's every different investigation has a different angle and a different dig. So I tend to be in front of the workstation, so to speak, by 7 or 8 a.m. and I basically plugged in until 8 or 9 p.m., sometimes later. But I do take breaks and I, go on walks and get exercise, go for a run, go to the gym. And I'm working on getting better at unplugging and doing these things because it is really addictive to just especially when there's a breaking story or a case that's unfolding over the weeks and months as there is right now. There's always more interesting angles to take. And so in a way, we were talking about this over dinner too the other night, is that there's sort of always an angle from everything you do in life sort of affects the job, and it often can affect the case. And even in my kind of downtime when I'm watching media just to chill out, I'm still watching media that is related to, the world of my job in some way. So it's kind of like I live my job and my job is my life. But it doesn't feel like a job.
When people see you, they might think a lot of your job is speaking in front of a camera, but it sounds like the predominant part of your job is research.
Yeah, 100%. And it used to be even more separated because the type of content I used to be making was far more of do the research than produce a video. And one thing I've been really having a lot of fun with this year is merging the two into live streaming the research as part of as the video itself. And there's still a lot of research that goes into behind the scenes before you kind of turn on the live and turn on the cameras. But it's been a lot of fun to sort of invite the audience in so that the people that are either super fans or are very into research themselves, hopefully to model the process so we can all sort of teach ourselves to be a little smarter and to kind of learn our way through the mistakes of journalism, the mistakes of the online world, and get a little better at the thinking part together. And that way it makes the whole process a lot more fun for me because there's a lot less kind of clerical editing and scripting and all these other things, which are still, scripting is an important part of a huge part of journalism, but it's really fun for me to move more into sort of education on the process and inviting people into the process directly. And it's a lot more vulnerable. It's a lot more raw and real. I make mistakes on stream frequently and then learn halfway through that oh, I totally have been getting this thing wrong for the last 20 minutes because I didn't understand something that seems basic to someone else. So it's a good humbling experience, it's a good learning experience. It's a lot of fun.
We're going to dive into everyone's favorite topics today. We're going to talk about Israel and Epstein and all of that, but I want to give people a little background too. So you taught improv at 14.
Yeah.
So you have been speaking in front of people, performing in a way, but developing your voice for a long time. Give people a little background about that.
Yeah. And this is one of my favorite parts of the Ian Carroll conspiracy is excuse me, you dropped out of high school and you were a teacher? I smell bullshit. It's yeah, you're right. That's actually a very unusual track to take. But my parents were both teacher educators. And so
you dropped out of high school.
I dropped out of high school. I do not have a GED and I do not have a college degree. I've been to college a few times because I was able to sneak in. But because my parents were teachers, I got free tuition at a school that was really cool. And it went up till middle school. And during that time, in my middle school years, I helped found this improv theater club which I wasn't like teaching at the time. I just was sort of like one of the leading student voices with this after school teacher that was the improv theater teacher. And when she went off to nursing school, it was the year, I guess that was the year after I went to high school. So my first year of high school, I came back and was like the assistant improv theater teacher after school. It's like 13 or 14. And then the next year she was getting ready to go to nursing school, and she sat me down and was like, hey, you should take this over. You can take this over. You've got the skills. You should do it. And it was a really seminal moment in my kind of trajectory as a young person. And so I started teaching improv theater as like one of my first actually paid jobs. And I think I was 15 at the time. I think that was like the legal age where you could be paid in Washington State. And then that expanded into like other after school teaching, which then expanded into assistant, like English teacher eventually, assistant that, summer school stuff. And then that basically led to being recruited by parents of students for other things in education. I was a vision therapist for a little while, which is not exactly education, but it kind of is. I got recruited to teach outdoor ed at one point. I volunteered for a whole year at another small private school that just needed help that was like near and dear to my heart. And that was like one of the coolest years of my life. And it's kind of cool now because I was hunting down a comment the other day from someone that claimed to have bbeen one of my students. It was from an anonymous YouTube account,
Of course.
which was wise of them to be anonymous. But they were like, dude, Ian was my 7th grade teacher. He's not a Fed. And I like went and looked and was like trying to figure out which student it was, but I couldn't tell. But it was funny because they're all like probably college age now, mostly.
I think in my head I used to kind of shit on the theater major, like, oh, just kind of this like whimsy little thing that is not tough to do or whatever I thought about it. But I realized Paul Felder, if you're familiar with him, he's a fearsome UFC fighter that is now a UFC commentator, came from the theater world. I have a close person in the family that was in the theater world growing up, but now is a captain on a Navy ship. Uh-huh. So I think it's raised its self-esteem in my books of like a really cool thing for a kid to go through. And
it can be. I think there's a lot of legitimacy to the stereotype.
There's a little bit of a corny side to it,
especially when you look at like if you look at the kids that aspire to go to Hollywood, it's like, oof, you should choose a different goal, bro. Maybe read about the Diddy files, but I never was like a theater kid in that way because I was at this little private school where it was just kind of a thing. And improv theater is a very unique type of theater where it gets you used to being a fool on stage, acting like an idiot in front of people, just being a goofball, coming up with crazy ideas on the fly. It's very good for your brain. I would recommend it to all young people, and to old people. But I did take part in like school plays and stuff because it was kind of mandatory, but I was really never into scripts. I was never into that kind of acting. I was into like inventing and coming up with ideas. And so another thing that we were talking about the other night is that I used to write raps and like perform raps at open mic nights when I was traveling.
Who were your rap influences as a kid?
Northwest hip hop. I grew up in Northwest Washington, and so there was like a really strong scene. Macklemore is the guy that everyone knows from that scene. Okay. He made it out and kind of signed a big deal for a little bit. But there was a bunch of groups around there, and the big one for me was Blue Scholars. They were really big in like 2000, maybe like 6 to 10, 12 era. There's another guy named Saul and Common Market, and there's a bunch of them. But yeah, I used to be a like total hip hop head in this kind of like conscious hip hop scene where it was like not about girls and cars, but about, socioeconomics and geopolitics and like big ideas and a little bit of the Illuminati sprinkled in there.
I would think, given your interest in a lyrical rapper plus conspiracies, that you would like Immortal Technique.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Was that a big...
Yeah, he was always a little dark for me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he was such a legend. And I remember one specific rap that I wrote, probably in like age 21. I was in Guatemala at the time, and I was like listening to an Immortal Technique beat on loop for the day. And I wrote this whole rap inspired by him because he does a lot of storytelling. That's like a made up story that has like a moral kind of behind it.
Dance with the Devil.
Exactly. And I think it was actually Dance with the Devil's beat that I was listening to. And I wrote sort of like an homage to that concept that is still, I'm sure it's still in my hard drive somewhere. That was a cool era of life. I've got a whole bunch of notebooks stacked up at home with like date rhymes.
That's a muscle that if you don't exercise, you lose. I used to
a little bit, yeah.
Freestyle rapping used to be one of my favorite things to do.
Well, I could never freestyle. I sucked at freestyle.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I think it's because I was prescribed Adderall as a young person.
Yeah.
So it was like between when I was doing improv theater and then I think it was like age 17 or something, I was prescribed Adderall. And that made me way more like locked into like overthinking all the different rhyme schemes you can do. And that changed it from like, oh, I can just come up with sick ideas. And like, I was like way out creatively. And it put me like way more in this driver's seat of like analytical, which was cool in some ways. It totally like beefed up my personality for a while in other ways. But from then on, I like could not just flow because I'd be like, dude, there's 3 more rhymes that I just missed in that single bar right there. And I'm a serious sucker for like a 4-syllable rhyme that's like different words all linking together. It's like, oof, that is so
when those
so
puzzle
good.
pieces fit together.
It's so good, especially when it's topical, when you're not just rapping, like when you're not just throwing in like, filler words to make the rap rhyme.
Almost like I think Tech Nine sometimes does this, where it's like it sounds really good when it fits together. And I'm a big Tech Nine fan, but sometimes it's like almost made up words.
But if you were to read it, you'd be like, cool, what have you said
really
in this bar?
Yeah.
But when it's like when you're like Harry Mack and you can like freestyle together like this crazy complex rhyme scheme that's also about an important idea or about like
early Eminem
something
too.
you want to say, exactly. That kind of stuff is just unparalleled. It's so cool.
What are the things that you are most fascinated in right now in the conspiracy world, things that you're thinking about? What is occupying a lot of your mind space?
My whole world is circling around the various cracks in like the big deep state right now, because there's always been kind of like layers to the conspiracy world. And the old school was like the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group. And then there was like the World Economic Forum. The Illuminati is always kind of there. The aliens, the lizard people. And there was always sort of this layering of like, are you at the like 9/11 layer, like the, like the cold case files layer, or are you at the Illuminati layer, or are you at the like portals to other dimensions layer? And everyone is kind of feeling out like, how weird is this world, and deciding like, are you going to be full tinfoil hat, or are you going to kind of limit yourself at one of these other lines? And as I started my content, I intentionally limited myself at these other lines, though I enjoy like, getting into all the wild stuff too, just to, have a good time. But I've always felt like the safe line at like JFK, 9/11 kind of stuff, that's not the whole picture. There is something deeper going on, but it's not necessarily all the way to like adrenochrome and lizard people and stuff like that. I don't know. There is a spiritual component going on, but who knows? But this Epstein thing cracked it open a certain way. Pizzagate was a big part of it. Epstein was a big part of it. 9/11 was a big part of it when you really think hard about how much it would take to bring those buildings down, and you really ask yourself who could possibly pull that off. But we are now with the Brigitte Macron story, with the Candace Owens story, the Charlie Kirk story, kind of this trifecta that has all these little subtle spider webs out into these other networks and these other stories. It's kind of cracking open this gateway into the shadow government behind everything. Epstein's employers, they weren't just the government of Israel. Like if you were to go to some random Israeli government official, they wouldn't have known anything about the Epstein network. But at the same time, if you had gone to the right random, like deep state government official in America, they might have known about it. They probably did. But probably someone in Saudi Arabia also knew about it, and someone in Qatar also knew about it, and someone in China probably knew about it, because there's these networks behind the governments that we see, behind the intelligence agencies that we see, that are sort of nestled in to this corporate, like military industrial world, that are being not necessarily directed by one group of people or by one family or by one person, I don't think, but there's something there. And the Brigitte Macron story might be the clearest window into it.
The fact that it's speculated that she's a man?
I would argue it's very well proven that she's a man. The speculation is the Rothschild connection.
Tell me more.
And it's not speculation. It's very well reported on that her husband, Emmanuel Macron, was a Rothschild protege, that they basically groomed him up, held his hand through his whole career, and selected him to be the president of France. And then the Brigitte Macron story circles in on a weird angle where her family lineage does not make any sense. And we have questions about what her family actually is and who they actually are. And and the protection around that story, the people that have died trying to report on that story, the connections between the Epstein network and the France networks.
I haven't heard any of this. What is the connection between Epstein and France?
So there's numerous. Like you could go back to what we've known for a long time, his connection to Jean-Luc Brunel, which is just into French modeling and the French modeling industries, which then gets you tied into like the French aristocracy of today. But I'm more interested in the more recent stuff, like the recent reporting based on the email leaks from Ehud Barak's email files. Ehud Barak was the ex-prime minister of Israel, the ex-leader of Israeli military intelligence, and he was basically Epstein's contact, his handler, his point of Israeli relation.
He was the guy that stopped in Manhattan almost on a monthly basis to check
Actually,
in on
it was
Epstein.
exactly monthly for a long time. There was like a whole year there where it was a monthly schedule, as though it was like on the calendar. And he is one of the most connected to Epstein of anybody, and he's obviously one of the most suspicious connections of anybody. And it's in these email leaks you can start to piece together that, oh, they were going to like Ivory Coast in the French region of Africa and selling military surveillance technology and weapons that were sanctioned, that were not allowed to be sold to this like rising dictator who was like basically taking power in the country, that was then basically on the Israeli take from then on. They were doing similar things in Mongolia. They were doing similar things in lots of different countries around the world, that at any one instance, when you just see that window, it's like, well, that's just kind of weird. But once you start to see the whole picture of what Epstein was doing in this more like larger intelligence network, you start to get a picture of, well, the Epstein angle of this deep state is clearly a globally operating system. And then you start to look at, like, in the French example specifically, you start to look at all these overlaps between where, like France was involved in that deal with Israel and Epstein being involved in that side of that deal. And you can go straight back to the Negev nuclear facility where Israel's nukes were built. And France actually financed that. France is the one that gave them a piece of the technology. I'm not actually versed on the specific technology elements that are involved in making nukes. Go figure. But it was like financed by American mobsters and the Jewish mob, and it was financed by the Rothschilds to build the facility. And France and South Africa both played a key role in getting the components necessary.
What time
to build
period
that.
was this?
That was in the 70s and 80s. You know, it might have been the 60s and 70s. I forget the exact dates, but it's old history at this point.
Because I guess one thing for people diving into the conspiracy world, and I think a lot more people, like it's been so nice having dinner parties recently at my house, and people from all walks of life are like, "Are you in it? Like, are you hip to this part and you hip to this part?" And everyone's kind of waking up to, yeah, a lot of what we've been told are lies. And then you go as far as I know people that are like dragons are real, and this, it can go really.
I like the dragons are real one. That one's fun.
It can go really off the deep end, but I guess what I'm wondering is, there's always a vague notion, like it's them, it's the Rothschilds, it's the Illuminati. Is the smoke still in the room and it's hard to see the shadowy figures, or do you feel like it's more and more easy to actually pinpoint who the they is in this equation?
That's a really good question. From my perspective, really like face deep in this research, it's pretty freaking easy to pinpoint it. But the thing is that semantically, it's designed to be impossible to pin down. Plausible deniability is built into this. And what I mean by that is that it's not, there's no building, there's no organization, there's no company, there's no LLC, there's no family name, there's no one table of guys. It's this thing that has evolved, and it's basically the black market. It's basically just organized crime is globalized in the exact same way that the modern economy is globalized. And if you had looked back at 1900 when we were industrializing the world, you would have looked at like, Standard Oil or JP Morgan or Edison Electric, General Electric. And you would have sort of seen like an American corporation there and like a Dutch corporation there. But ultimately they were already globalizing. And at the time, organized crime was sort of similar. In the early 1900s, organized crime was a bunch of little street gangs, but like the Italian mafia had their ties to Sicily, and the Jewish mob had their ties to Israel and around the world as well. And they have grown up as we have all grown up. And so what used to sort of be, in our minds, seems like a simpler day when industry was simpler, when trade was simpler, it has completely changed. And trying to understand the economy today is like trying to read like alien hieroglyphics. And the black markets have done the same thing. And the black markets have always been a more obviously conspiratorial and cult-like kind of space, because it's all built on handshakes and who you know and who you trust and will kill you if you don't. That like all the mechanisms that have always been present in the black markets, when they evolve into the 2025 kind of era, you wind up with a globalized black market that has globalized kingpins, that has globalized cartel bosses. And so really what we're describing is all of the black markets, they all trace up to their own version of like El Chapo, right? And we're familiar with El Chapo. Like the drug industry is one that we all understand better, because the war on drugs was this big propaganda thing that they tried to demonize while they shipped them in. But Americans understand that, like, okay, I bought, weed from my street dealer. I bought crack from the guy on the corner. But I can understand how there's this like funneling of authority, control, incentive, money that goes up ultimately to this one dude in South America, this one dude in Colombia, this one dude in Mexico. And that same network structure is basically what we're seeing in the human trafficking world with the Epstein network and whoever's behind him, with the arms trafficking world, although that's way more obscure because most people don't even realize that's going on. All these black market industries, they all work together because their industries are inherently linked, and they're linked by money because they all need to launder their money. And so the black finance world, the dark finance world, that is interfacing with all of them, and they're all using the same banks, they're all using the same networks. And the financial world is making a shitload of money on the backside from crime, from organized crime, which is very much a global enterprise now. It's very much a government enterprise now. And so as those industries have all evolved to be more globalized, to be more powerful, to lobby governments, to like essentially found intelligence agencies, you wind up with this sort of shadowy space that's like a cabal that everyone has a different name for, everyone has a different explanation for, and it's hard to pin down because it's a decentralized thing that has evolved, but in that dark ocean, there's a bunch of little fish and there's these giant whales that swim through, and you can notice when the whale swims through because there's certain things that, Joe Schmo on the corner just isn't doing. Like,
so right? It's kind of like when multiple religions over time, they have the same word for the flood narrative or the same word for God. Like we all kind of are aware that this is happening. We have our own way of labeling it. But I guess I want to try and demystify it a little bit more. Like let's just assume the French Macron, that he's a Rothschild picked successor. Let's just assume that maybe J.D. Vance could be a similar kind of figure. What I'm curious about is, one, how do these figures get selected? And two, who actually are the people that are like, we have our eyes on you, we're going to pick you, we trust you, and we're going to bring you into this circle? Because these people have real names, real faces, real homes, real, can you help demystify it a little bit?
It's two different questions, and they have kind of two distinctly different tracks in my mind, at least. Okay. And the one is, how do you pick and train people? Mm-hmm. Or rather, the one is, how do you train people? And the other is, how do you pick people? And the training is a kind of a dark rabbit hole, and there's disagreement on it. But people that are explicitly selected, like Emmanuel Macron specifically, like maybe J.D. Vance specifically, although I'm not entirely confident that J.D. Vance would fall into this category, but there's definitely people that are specifically abused in childhood, groomed into their position. Epstein is one that was probably abused in childhood and then kind of tracked, monitored, and taken down that path. People that are going to be, especially, you hear this in human trafficking all the time, and it's always hard to corroborate because it's almost always survivor testimony, and survivors of human trafficking situations almost always have serious mental health problems and trauma, which is very understandable. So it's kind of like a he said, she said space, unfortunately, and you have to dive into it, which is dark, and then you have to decide for yourself what to believe. But all throughout, there's stories of how the traffickers are basically all people that were abused and groomed in order to have sort of dissociative capabilities in their personality, because you sort of have to be dissociative in your personality in order to abuse people at that level. And another good example is like child soldiers in Africa. That sort of abuse is cyclical, and they're not going to pick like some like rich white kid that balks at the sight of blood. They're going to pick some child soldier that was like snorting gunpowder and shooting other kids when he was 7 if they want him to be in charge of like a giant like human child soldier operation. And so lots of people have indicated that that's similar in the Epstein network, and it's similar in these other human trafficking rings, is there's this sort of like dark kind of MK Ultra level selection process going on for the sort of like important leadership roles back there. But
So the cabal finds people that have experienced childhood trauma, which makes them more vulnerable, more.
in many instances, it's their own kids. In many instances, it's the children of some very powerful kind of occultist, messed up families, and not in every instance, but we have circumstantial evidence of that happening kind of broadly, and then we have very acute instances where like we have powerful families where there's like abuse runs in the family, incest runs in the family, pedophilia runs in the family, and you can just trace it straight back with very legitimate reporting. And it's kind of a tough one to talk about because it gets censored a lot because it's a bad topic, and it's very powerful families. It's easy for it to feel like this wild conspiracy, like the DuPont family comes up in this Candace train of thought, and the DuPont family is also this giant public corporation that we think of as like chemicals and plastics, but you can look up the articles about the DuPont heir being pardoned for abusing his 4-year-old niece or nephew or whatever it was. She got off with a slap on the wrist. Those sorts of things, they're kind of all over the place once you start looking in the right families and the right places. But there's this other side of what you're asking of how do you, that's like how do you train people? And that sort of is just one deeper angle of that. But how do you select people? I think the far more interesting piece of the answer about how do you select people is not how do you select like the J.D. Vances so much as how do you select just all the foot soldiers and all the middlemen and all the people that are sort of like halfway up these dark industries that might not know everything. And it's this incentive structure. It's this world that's built on corruption, essentially. And it grew out of capitalism in the West, but it grows out of communism just as easily. And my perspective on it is when you get a incentive system started rolling where corrupt acts elevate your status, then you are inherently at all levels, without even an order going out, without any decision making being done, you're inherently continuously selecting for someone that will actively be corrupt. And the more corrupt you'll be, the further ahead you'll get. The more money you're willing to kind of take from other people, the more you're willing to abuse people, the more you're willing to lie, cheat, steal, the higher up you get. And so they wind up with the cream of the crop at the top of these financial institutions, the top of the corporate world, the top of the government politics world, the top of the media world.
So, for example, let's say a bank, Chase Bank, one of the biggest banks in America. Is it not a guy that gets hired out of college in the finance department, works his way up, and by the time he reaches 50, 60, he's in the C-suite? Like, are you almost saying these corporate companies are handpicking a traumatized individual?
Two different lines of reasoning.
Okay.
Not necessarily handpicking a traumatized individual. I'm saying that is, you see that more acutely when you're looking at like Jeffrey Epstein himself, as opposed to when you're looking at like Sidney Whale. Am I getting his name right? Sidney Whale? I'm pretty sure it is. His guy at JP Morgan.
That was his advisor.
I'm pretty sure Sidney Whale is his name.
That's
the guy that texted him about how much he enjoyed his time with Snow White, and next he wants Beauty and the Beast. The guy that texted him about how he's never had a friendship so profound while he was sitting in Epstein's hot tub on Epstein's island. That dude is dark. And
what is Beauty and the Beast code for?
I mean, I would assume for an underage girl dressed up as a Disney princess.
And Snow White was cocaine?
No, I would assume Snow White was a Disney princess. The context in which the sentence was said.
I'm so out of this.
Yeah, the context in which the email was sent was like it was very lacking in context, but it was like, hope you enjoyed Snow White. Who do you want next? Keyword who. And he said, Beauty and the Beast. So I assume that's code for his fetish of choice, but that's just my presumption. I don't know that. But when it comes to like a bank, for example, Epstein is actually a good example of someone who entered into the bank as like a mathematical, somewhat genius, but by his actual banking, like
he's an actual mathematical genius, or he marketed himself
people
that way?
talk about him as though he is. I'm inclined to think that he actually is genuinely mathematically very talented, particularly in laundering money. And then eventually he got really good at laundering money through charity networks, which is why he helped set up the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Clinton Global Initiative. And he was really good at currency markets, largely at manipulating currency markets and sort of So basically, he is a guy that came in not with your typical banker skill set, but with a corrupt banker skill set, and with his mind focused on corrupt industries and the high life of a corrupt, evil person. And he immediately shot his way straight to the top. He was basically hand selected by the leader, by the guy in charge of Bear Stearns. At the time, he wasn't quite at the top yet, but by the end of Jeffrey's time there, he was the CEO of Bear Stearns. Someone Goldman. And I'm not just making a joke.
Well.
And so then there's a scandal there because they're doing a bunch of corrupt shit, and he gets jettisoned, and he goes one step deeper into the network, and that's when he gets selected to start. Well, either he gets selected or he inherently puts himself in position to start working more in criminal finance, where this is when he was a bounty hunter for billionaires. But really, what he was doing is he was like doing shady money laundering stuff and doing arms trafficking with Robert Maxwell, and there's a little bit of evidence that he did some deals with Anand Khashoggi and another guy called Douglas Lease that was sort of.
In what ways was he involved in arms trafficking?
We don't have a lot of at least I don't know a lot of concrete evidence of it. I think Whitney Webb could speak more thoroughly because she's done a lot deeper research into it. But it's things where like he'll show up in a location with a known arms trafficker, or he'll be noted as traveling with a known arms trafficker. He'll be photographed with a known arms trafficker in ways that you sort of like put two and two together, and you realize that that's the crowd he's running with in this like. And
to be clear, he's not the guy delivering crates of AK-47s. He's the relationship guy that connects who and who.
It's hard to say. I don't know one way or the other, but if I had to guess, I would assume that he has delivered some crates of some weapons in his time.
On his jet.
Probably. Yeah, I would guess probably. But I think that probably far more of what he did was what you're referring to as this sort of relationship management thing, this guy that's organizing them. And the thing I was talking about earlier where him and Ehud Barak flew to the Ivory Coast in Africa and negotiated sort of illicit arms deals between Israel and Africa on Israel's behalf, that was more of the latter of like, we're negotiating.
Is that more of confirmed arm deals?
Yeah, we have photos of those weapons. Yeah, the UN was very much investigating it because they were like, I'm pretty sure it was the UN that was investigating.
Oh, no, but UN is Hamas, so we can't trust them.
Exactly. And Jeffrey Epstein is God's chosen people, so he can do no wrong.
You mentioned Jeffrey Epstein as a child, potentially being traumatized, and let's keep it soft for...
Yeah, we don't know that. Mm-hmm. I'm just speculating.
But what do we even know about his childhood period? I've never heard any stories about him as a kid.
We don't know a whole lot.
I've never heard his parents
brought up. We know that
up.
he went to Interlochen, School for the Arts, which is like later teenage years. And we know about like what his parents did for work, which is kind of humble beginnings. I don't actually remember off the top of my head. His mom was in some sort of, I'm going to get it wrong if I try to pin it down, but it was like it wasn't some crazy, like one of them might've been a teacher. I forget, but we do have, people talking about him. So sort of secondhand sources talking about like how good he was at piano all the way back then. And one in particular that is a source that you kind of have to take it or leave it, it's just a trust me, is a guy that is a whistleblower from satanic ritual abuse networks that has a really horrific story. His name is Annika Lucas, and spelled Anekke, I think it is. And he describes having met Jeffrey Epstein, I think, on 2 different occasions during his time as a person in the trafficking networks. And he describes the abuse that he went through, the grooming that he went through in order to sort of dissociate. And he describes that Jeffrey Epstein was one of the best at that he had ever met, at this switching between being an absolute monster and being like a classy businessman gentleman. And that piece specifically aligns very much with what everyone else says about him. So we're kind of left to piece together different testimonies that have different levels of credibility, and you sort of have to just do your own research on it to judge how much you trust each one. And it all is based on your understanding of how dark the world is and so it's like this stepping into your knowledge of the things they don't tell us. And at a certain point, it's up to you to decide what is credible and what is not.
Have there been any follow-up interviews with Melinda Gates? Because I know she had that interview that was extremely revealing where she said something to the effect of Epstein is evil personified. She could just feel it coming off his body, that he just was a dark, dark individual. I'd be curious to hear more about that. Do you know if she's come forward?
To my knowledge, no. She has very much left the limelight and left her bill. And the things that Bill has said about it since have been very telling. Like, well, he's dead now, so I guess you just got to be careful. And I always can't help but notice that the other Bill Clinton, his wife is very much still with him, and there's all sorts of allegations and reporting on what Hillary's been caught up in over the years. So kudos to Melinda for getting the hell out of there. But I don't think that she's made any more statements.
I think it was back in like maybe the 2010s, maybe around Trump's first run. I heard a lot more about the Clintons, the Clinton body trail, the Clinton Foundation. But I feel like in the last few years in the popular zeitgeist, they've kind of disappeared from the magnifying glass of the conspiracy theorists. Are they still someone that is very much a person of interest in the Epstein network or this New World Order shadow figures, so to speak?
I think we all have a slightly different perspective. And I think that the stepping back in the prominence probably largely has to do with how much she was exposed as kind of a lame duck in her presidential run and in her involvement in like the Russiagate stuff, and just how, and her handling of her own emails is just like, what an unserious threat Hillary Clinton is, even though she's been involved in some very dark shit in her past. And a lot of people think it's like, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist. It's like, no, you haven't actually researched things like the death of Vince Foster, like Chinagate, like her charity is a hard way to put it. Look up Hillary Clinton in Haiti and human trafficking and Laura Silsby. And so there's actually, like, even for me, I will still find new things in Hillary's past that I wasn't even aware of. I was looking into Bill for just a little bit of a piece at one point, like 4 months ago, and I stumbled across an archive of sourced sort of reporting about the Clintons. It was like kind of the kind of website where, you know, the person that's behind it is like publish, disappear. And it was all linked, all sourced to like real journalism, real reporting, archived articles that I could double check. It just had volumes more than I realized, going all the way back to Clinton's days in Arkansas, which I was aware of, but even back before that to other weird real estate stuff they were doing and drug smuggling stuff that was going on around them that all just seemed coincidentally to center on Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton in a lot of ways. They have a long, dark history, and a lot of people don't even go back to Arkansas and to Mina and to cocaine. And
where they actually
80s.
made a full movie about that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, would you say they're both dark actors, or
100%? Yeah.
And do you think they're working in tandem, or they have their own little?
A bit of both. I think that all people in these dark spaces are inherently servants of like the metaphorical devil, in the sense that when you're that evil, when you do the kind of things that we suspect them of doing in the shadows, you're inherently only looking out for your own survival, and you'll do anything to get ahead. And sometimes that'll align with your husband. But ultimately, I think that if Hillary and Bill had to choose between their own survival and their spouse's survival, I think they would probably both kill their spouse. That's my personal conspiratorial opinion.
Now, anytime someone mentions worshiping the devil or doing evil things for the devil, I know this is going to come off as naive and I'm maybe too optimistic about the world, but I just can't. It's hard for me to imagine someone thinking that the devil is real and then saying that's the guy I'm going to follow. And I know, like, even the Church of Satan, I don't think most of those people are about worshiping the devil. That's mostly
a controlled op.
Well,
Anton LaVey was a military, high-level U.S. military. And
but isn't most of what they do is to block
operations.
Christians? If the Christians get a statue in Iowa, we get a statue in Iowa.
Yeah, it's a giant meme.
But I don't think they're actually having blood sacrifices in the
that's
Church
what
of
I'm
Satan.
saying. What I'm saying is that organization is exactly so that this conversation happens, so that when people say Satanism, they say, but look at the Church of Satan. This is just ridiculous. This isn't like some fucking scary thing, because that was started by a psychological warfare operator in the military named Anton LaVey, and it is intended to be a cover in the front. And I think that the actual quote-unquote Satanists, the Marina Abramoviches of this world, I don't think that most of them actually think of it as the devil. I think that and this is just my speculation based upon my level of understanding, I think that they probably all have their own personal understanding of like what this true power is behind the scenes that they're all trying to clamber for. But ultimately, it's fighting for control. It's power. And when power is your God, you're ultimately going to wind up doing things that are indistinguishable from worshiping the devil. Because if you're going to do immoral things to get power, that's the devil. But I think there's a lot of really interesting substance to theories that there's an occult nature to some of that, where they actually think that that's the true God and that God God is like the false God. And then I think one of the really interesting ones, and I'm just kind of talking about the theories that exist, I don't ascribe to one of these, but one of the really interesting ones is thinking that it's aliens and that there is contact with aliens somewhere back there, and that that's how they explain it. And there's lots of theories that like the contact with aliens is basically the pipeline into why they believe they have true power, because they actually do have this connection to something else in high technology and shit. And I think that shit's like just a wild theory to listen to.
I'm going to give a real estate analogy and then connect it to conspiracy theories, and you can tell me how you fit in here. But in real estate, you can't look at every deal that comes across your desk. If the flip only has a 5K margin on it and one thing goes wrong with the plumbing, you've lost yourself in the deal. You want something that has meat on the bone, something that you know is going to be a reliable flip. And sometimes where I get lost in the conspiracy world is it's almost like we jump at everything is one giant shadowy Illuminati thing. Yeah. And is it hard in your position to ever decide when to pump the brakes and say, this doesn't have much truth to it, and then focusing on the real ones? Because that's where I think we're the people that aren't maybe into the space already, they hear one bullshit one, like dragons are real or this or that.
Yep.
And then they're like, well, the rest of them are nonsense too.
Yeah. There's a couple questions there, and the last one there is a really important one to address, is if you think that when you hear one conspiracy theory, which is a made-up word that the CIA came up with, and then you think that they're all not real, you're retarded, and you should probably get your brain checked. You can start with the basic ones. JFK, 9/11, COVID, take your pick. There's a million that are very obviously there were people conspiring on some level, you figure out what level, to benefit off the backs of others. Organized crime, intelligence agencies. But there's this other side of what you were just saying of how do you draw your own line of what to pay attention to, what to learn about, what to believe is real. And for me, the line is different for those different categories I just made. Is like, for what to believe is real, my line is way back here. I am a fallible human. I don't have proof of just about anything. I don't even have proof that we're not in a simulation. This might be all a simulation. It might be the Matrix, or we might be in a time machine. I don't fucking know. I don't know what's going on. So in order to actually believe with 95 to 99% confidence that I think something is true, it's a pretty high bar. That being said, I operate on a lot of, I'm 80% certain of this. I'm 90% certain that 9/11 had foreign state actors involved that were not the Islamic terrorists, we're told. So I operate off of that looking forwards, but I'm also always looking for other evidence to adjust my perspective on things. And when it comes down to how do you decide what to take in the first place, the real estate analogy is a really great one, because for my job, for content I'm going to produce, it's I'm not looking into the history of the Khazarian Empire, bro. I'm not a historian. I don't read the language. I don't have time to read 20 different books about ancient Khazarian history just to learn this one little thing. Have at it. I don't know what the truth is back there. But sometimes those ones, aliens are actually the devil, and that's what Hillary Clinton is part of a cult that worships. Some real estate deals are so crazy that you've got to go out and get a beer and talk about it, because it's dog, you've got to hear what Miguel just dragged out of the downtown Las Vegas. He's got the craziest deal going on. It's dude, tell me about this deal. This is crazy. And I'm not trying to hate on the people that believe that conspiracy. I'm just trying to say that it's some conspiracies I just have to relegate to the realm of entertainment, even if there might be some small sliver or small percentage of chance that they're true, because I can't devote the time to trying to prove out something so ambiguous and far out when there's so many more important things right in front of my plate.
I guess one other thing that stands out to me is how competent of operators these people must be. They must be the most smooth professionals in existence, because let's say you look at our government, you look at the Pete Hegseths of the world, where things are leaked on Signal. The emails are so blatant. It just seems like one giant PR nightmare after another with how they handle Kash Patel. They don't even know what's going on. Are these people just the top-notch operators? They're so smooth. They never let an email leak. They don't communicate
Not
in
at
the
all.
wrong channels.
Their shit is all over the place. That's why conspiracy theories have so much ammunition these days. And
So
I'll
how
take
are
you
we
through a
not
few
naming and
examples.
unmasking these people, though? If there's
Oh,
so
we
much
are.
out there.
I'll take you through a few examples.
Please.
Jeffrey Epstein fucking left paper trails all over the planet. Jeffrey Epstein's paper trail is 1,000 miles long. It's not that we don't know what he was doing. It's that we have a giant government that's just putting their hands over their eyes and their hands in their ears and pretending that they don't fucking see it. We have paper trails for days leading straight to the Johns. And right now, you could go to any... I'm literally wearing a shirt right now produced by Ryan Dawson that's been out for years and years and years that has
beautiful.
a whole name of Epstein clients, on a whole list of names of Epstein clients all over it, all over the back, that we could very much go and send a competent law enforcement agency to them to investigate them either on the day that it all broke or today, and you could still dig up enough dirt to put these people in jail.
You've got to send me a link to that shirt,
It's
by the
fun.
way.
Yeah, he has it on his website. But so Jeffrey Epstein's one example. Hillary Clinton's another great example. This bitch was fucking sending things on her private email server that directly implicated her. Anthony Weiner had a folder called life insurance on his laptop that he just lost. And like, it's just there. Hunter Biden is a whole other story. But then you get to... you can get to a deeper layer where it's like, okay, but those guys, maybe they're not like the head of some big thing. So let's look at Brigitte Macron. Brigitte Macron was kind of hiding in plain sight for a while, but once journalists started to kind of get a sense of, wait, like, who the fuck are you?
Is it true French journalists or journalists in general have been, a lot of them have been disappeared?
Oh, yeah. No, they've been straight up found floating in the river.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many are we talking?
I know of one specifically that I was just researching. I believe it's a few more than that. Well, that's a lie. I know of several specifically that I was just kind of going through a list of suspicious deaths in France since Macron's presidency and before. I don't have the level of expertise with those cases to say for sure that these are all tied to Brigitte at all, and I don't think they all are. But there's one journalist in specific whose name I'm unfortunately forgetting, but everyone that followed the Brigitte story knows her name. And she was one of the main first journalists that dug really deep for many years and had a whole bunch of files on this story, and she wound up floating in the river dead.
And was this connected to the gender identity story?
Yes, yeah. But the thing is that you can't ask, is she a man, without realizing that she is actually probably operating under the identity of her brother. And when you actually look at the story, you realize that there are so many holes in the story, it is out of control. I mean, the official story is fucked. It's that basically a 40-year-old teacher who had a family, a husband and children, then married, was seduced by her 14 or 15-year-old student, and then she left her family to marry him when he was like 17 or 18 or 19 or something like that.
And that's out in the open.
That is out in the open. That is their official love story. And they have all this like stuff to try to support how that's like legitimate. And then in Macron's like presidential photo, his official photo as president of France, there's a book that they put in that photo intentionally that is written by a open pederast, a person that wrote about, like in his own books, in his own writing, about his desire to rape children. And they just like decided to put that book in there. Little details like that are like, what? But when you look at Brigitte specifically, you realize that there's no photos of her pregnant, no photos of her as a young person. Her brother, who is still alive, is mysteriously missing, and he's just a private person. But all of this grief that has been forced upon her, all these unfair accusations, she would embarrass Candace Owens to the ends of the earth immediately if she just opened up her photo album and just said, oh, look, here's a photo. But instead of that, I shit you not, what they did is eventually, once Candace was breaking the story, this was after trying to suppress it in France for years, and then Candace picks it up and brings it to a global audience, and then they finally produced some photos for the first time ever, because there's no photos of Brigitte from before a certain year, which is very weird. And there's no photos of her brother after a certain year. But then what happens is they release, I think, 4 photographs that prove it all is like a lie, a hoax. And they release it through like a third-party media agency woman. And the person that released the photos for them has multiple convictions for forgery of documents. I shit you not. She's like a PR person who has been convicted in France of forging documents in the past. And so it's like, what is going on, dog? And then you pair that with your husband is literally a Rothschild plant, like a guy that was strung along through the banking industry, didn't even know what EBITDA was, like didn't know the most basic banking facts. Everyone talked about how he was like an absolute like buffoon, but got strung through as like and propped up and lauded by the mainstream media, and then boom, he's president all of a sudden. And these two are the people that we get as the president and first lady of France. You know, the stronghold of the Rothschild empire, because the Rothschild empire was a multinational family kind of thing in banking during the early 1900s. And then they sort of like fell off in Italy a little bit. And they seem to have fell off in Italy a little bit and fell off over on kind of like the Bavarian side a little bit. And now it's Switzerland, France, and England is where they're like very official modern businesses. And so it's like, yeah, like how many coincidences and how many of these things can be happening before you start to realize that it's more conspiratorial to think that this is not what's going on than that it is. And the only thing that's been saving them is that it takes a certain amount of due diligence to even learn the elements of the story, because it just sounds so unbelievable. But the internet starts to open that door wide up. And then COVID opened that door wide up because everyone had all the time in the world and they were living through this grand conspiracy in real time. And so a lot of people's eyes got opened and they had all the time in the world to get curious. And I think that we're going through this renaissance right now of information is wide open and people's minds are wide open because everyone's been screwed by their own team at least once now. And suddenly the whole world is starting to hone in on like, wait a minute. It might not all be true, but certainly these people are on to something.
It's a really fun era that we're in, and I think why you're so popular is that people have this disenchantment with the system.
Yeah.
Their disenchantment with their government, and they look at you as a person that is leading the quest towards truth. And it also is kind of fun because you get to crowdsource it with these people.
Yeah.
You know, you get to collaborate with your audience to try and build a better idea of the truth. And I guess speaking on truth, I think one big breakthrough we've had as a culture, pretty much anyone under 40, has been unveiling the mask around Israel, being able to call out all the atrocities, all the brutality, all the gaslighting, and it actually feels amazing, doesn't it, to actually be able to look at these situations that for some reason the boomers are so bought in on.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not just the boomers, but the Mike Huckabees, the Talmud Teds, the Marco Rubios of the world, and they're trying to pitch this line to us, and it's just not working anymore. The magic has been lost. The propaganda is failing, and so I guess that's just a general statement. At first, let's just dig in a little bit to Israel. By the way, I didn't see you on the nominations for Anti-Semitism of the Year. I was actually a little disappointed for you. I kind of wanted you to get that.
They
badge
didn't even
of
put
honor.
Nick Fuentes on the. Nick Fuentes, no Candace Owens, no Ian Carroll.
To have Miss Rachel as one of your top suspects just further shows how ludicrous your whole movement is. Because it would have been a lot more understandable if they put a Fuentes or a you or Owens on there, because it has. You know what I mean? But Miss Rachel...
Well, do you know why they did it that way? My opinion, obviously I don't have a source on this, but my opinion is that they realized rightly that everyone listening to me or listening to Candace or especially listening to Nick, they don't give a shit if you call them an anti-Semite. You'll get more popular. So actually it would work against them to put us on that list at this point. But they specifically chose, and having Tucker on the list is very telling. Because Tucker would normally fall into like the Ian, Candace, Nick kind of like, because he does a similar job to us. He's in a similar industry to us, even though he's very different than us. But he was chosen, and then Miss Rachel and these other people. And when you look at the audiences and sort of the groups that you would think are essential to those people's success, those audiences are the type of audiences that still might be swayed by calling someone an anti-Semite.
They're still scared of it.
Exactly. And so Tucker, he has a different audience base than Candace or Nick or me, where his audience base is still coming from Fox News people. It's still coming from, it has a lot of new people in it, but it also still carries this kind of like boomer Fox News like generation. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's why he made the list. And then Miss Rachel is like all these parents and normies and stuff. And these other people on the list are all these people that I think they thought we can effectively attack these people by putting them on the list, but don't put like, the obvious suspects that they would normally be talking about being anti-Semites on the list, because you'll actually just make them more popular.
But do they not realize that putting Miss Rachel on the list
Yeah, they're
only
not very
hurts
smart.
them, only makes them less credible?
I mean, you were the one saying about how how are they so devious that we don't notice? But it's like we fucking totally notice.
Or I guess this is up your alley. I know one of the other conspiracies about what the Israelis are doing is they want to turn the world against them because it fulfills prophecy of the end of the world. And
I suspect that is true for some of them, not all of them. And when you read into, I'm not very well read into Jewish religion, but my understanding is that there is a depth into Jewish religion you can go where there like are prophecies that basically say like, in order for, the second rising or coming of the Jews, like coming of our God, all people will turn against the Jews at that time. I'm probably butchering it, but like I could understand how, there would be a sect of Jewish people that feel that way and believe that way. And certainly there's some deeply extremist Jewish people in the Netanyahu government and in Israel right now. But I don't by any means think that all Jews believe that at all. I mean, you can't say all of any religion. That'd be ridiculous.
Do you think that the top people within Israel, the top people that are pushing that what they're doing in Gaza is only self-defense, do you think they are realizing they're losing the culture war, or are they so arrogant? Because I've had experience with some of these IDF soldiers. The arrogance of these guys is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Do you think that they're actually confident, like, hey, we're doing great, we got the American public, or do you think they're panicking?
I think it's an IQ test. I think that the smart ones absolutely realize and are absolutely panicking. Like Jonathan Greenblatt, head of the ADL, he's a smart cookie. He didn't get to be head of the ADL and do what he's done with the ADL without being deeply intelligent, even if he's evil. And he has been sounding the alarm on the anti-Semitism problem and on the youth problem, the TikTok problem for a long time. People like Benjamin Netanyahu, deviously intelligent, he gets that this is the most important, and he has openly said on camera at a convention of U.S. influencers in Israel that the propaganda war is the most important front of Israel's now like 4,000 front war. They opened their 6 millionth front this year. And he just straight up says it, that the most important one is TikTok and X, and the most important is the social media, the influencers, the ideas, the minds of young people. And he just openly talks about how they need to influence the American mind in order to support Israel more. And right around that time is when Israel multiplied its propaganda budget times 20. And times 20, which is an insane multiplier, not times 2, times 20. And that is exactly when X started to get flooded with all these new accounts that are just shilling, all these new accounts that are just literally entirely devoted to trying to discredit Candace Owens for, whatever reason. All these new Jewish conferences in America that are overtly just Israel conferences, all of this new stuff going on, including this one that went somewhat viral recently where a FARA filing, a foreign agent registration filing, was found for an organization called Show Faith by Works, which is like they're not a nonprofit. They're a foreign entity, essentially. They're a business. And what the FARA registration does is it forces them to detail all of what they're going to do and all of the money that's going to be involved and all of their plans for what propaganda they're going to be doing. And it's basically just it's like 80 pages or something, 20 pages, 40 pages. It's a long document with all these detailed plans about how they're going to target American Christians, mostly on the west coast of the United States, by geofencing American churches and tracking every single cell phone that goes to church and targeting them with pro-Israel ads. And then they're going to also be running advertising campaigns with pastors and running October 7th
Advertising
museums.
campaigns with pastors?
Yeah, that part is... it's not as specific as the geofencing stuff is in there. It's just sort of it's subtle, sort of in between the lines in there, and so it's not as much of a like we're going to spend this much money with this pastor for this advertisement. That's not in that document, but that document does talk about their investment in pro-Israel advocacy in these church communities, and it talks about doing it in more ways than just geofencing and sending you a digital ad. And then we now have all this footage of pastors just basically doing Israel sermons over and over and over and over. And actually, like Pastor Jack Hibbs literally inviting an Israeli onto stage to...
Is that Charlie Kirk's pastor?
No. Jack Hibbs is one of the other pastors aligned with Turning Point USA, and he is at Calvary Chapel. I'm gonna forget something Hills, Chino Hills, I think it is, in California, where Pastor Rob comes from, and where Calvary Chapel kind of is most powerful. And Jack Hibbs, there's literally footage from a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, of him inviting an Israeli into his church congregation, and they've got them all there, and he says, and they're like opening it up, and they do their intros, and then he says, like, so where should we really start for the discussion of how to understand the Bible? Or so I'm kind of butchering his words, but basically it's like, where should we start? And I think we should start rightly with October 7th. Literally, that's what he says. And then he brings in an Israeli to tell his church congregation about October 7th as the starting point for how to understand the Bible, is basically what his whole sermon was that day.
And you think this guy, okay, 20K, 7K, whatever it is?
I have no idea. But I mean, the dark thing is that I think some of them do it for free. And I think that some of them do it for free, where the actual incentive structure is a far more convoluted, because here's the thing, is that the uncomfortable truth is that, and this is the truth that has made Nick Fuentes so popular and viral, that he has right, even though it's uncomfortable to talk about, is that sort of the old guard like Tucker would say it's just Israel and it's Israel's politics and it's Israel's government. And Nick says, no, that's not true. And he's right, I believe, to say that it's actually mostly the problem is the network of American Jews that are supporting the government of Israel, because as American Jews, they have rights that Israeli politicians don't have. And they have power here that Israeli politicians don't have. And so when Bill Ackman, an American Jew, decides to take action on behalf of Israel, he's an American and he has every right to spend his money in this way and to get Claudine Gay canceled from Harvard and to get these students kicked out of school and to get this funding for this thing because he's an American.
Now, do you think this is how the average American Jew feels, or is this the elite
I think
American
it's the elite
Jews?
billionaire class.
The Larry Ellisons.
But American Jews around the world are subjected to one of the strongest propaganda campaigns of anyone, because it's speaking to them and their people about real events that really did happen and about real horrors in their past. And they have this religious ideology, this religious in-group identity to back it all up. And so I think it's very understandable that Jewish people would be afraid right now for their safety and their security, because they see this rising anti-Semitism and they have all of this insane dollar spend of propaganda devoted to telling them that they should be afraid and that they need to support Israel, otherwise they're going to get holocausted, which is completely like moronic. People like me have no desire to see anyone holocausted. We're actually very committed to stopping things like holocausts.
We want everyone to be safe, sound, and happy, but and
that includes Palestinians. Exactly.
That's the sick, twisted side of it. Is that they cannot understand. I mean, I had there's a Marine that goes by the name of Clyde. He was a former Marine. He's an Orthodox Christian. You may have seen him on Instagram, but he visited Palestine and visited a few different villages. And he said, imagine, Tom, if someone came into Wisconsin, you just lived in a smaller type of village, they put barbed wire fences around your village, they make military checkpoints, and then you're the bad guy in your own area.
And then they come into your house in the middle of the night with no warrant, no explanation, and they just take your kid and put him in prison, and you never see him again.
And that's the other piece, because we're working on another piece, life under Israeli occupation. And I'm very excited about this. And we got connected to this Palestinian American, and his son, Saif, got killed in the middle of the night by Israeli settlers. And Mike Huckabee himself went to this village, went to this house and said, you will get answers. We have your back on this. And
bullshit.
And just like most of the cases with the Israeli settlers, most of them do not even get prosecuted. And you see the videos of them, Israeli settlers.
Celebrated. They get funded.
Just like the grapers out there, too, it seems like. We'll table that for another time. But you have Israeli settlers cutting down olive trees, hitting elderly women in the head, putting goats in the water supply, putting the IDF soldiers are putting demolition orders on these villages. And it's not like these guys are bawling, these Palestinians, like they're barely hanging on. They have these like little tiny, very rural 8 to 10
And the moment they fight back, look at these terrorists. Look at these terrorists. This is why we have to do this to them, right? So they're in this catch-22 of if you fight back to protect your land, protect your family, protect your people, you give propaganda to the Israelis and you become terrorists. And then America just sends more dollars to bomb you. And if you don't fight back, you get murdered in the middle of the night, your land gets taken, and you get put more and more into this prison state.
And this kid Saif that got killed, his cousin just got released. Did you see the kid that was just released? He was held in 9.5 months
stuff about it, yeah.
in an Israeli prison. And I talked to his uncle, and he's like, it's too dangerous for this kid to be interviewed because he already almost, I mean, you could have died in that prison. He could have just disappeared forever. I'm very curious to know what his treatment was like. If you look at the videos comparing hostage releases and you see the Jewish people, the Israeli people that got released by Palestinians, they look pretty normal. They look okay. They say goodbye to their captors. It looked like there was actually almost like a relationship between the captors.
A respect.
But then you see the Palestinians that are getting released. Some of them don't have eyes. Some of them
missing limbs.
Some of them look so deranged and skinny. Like, it's so obvious. And yet, like, I'll talk to this one IDF soldier, Sam, who's like, you don't have a shred of proof that there's anything bad happening, and you're just an anti-Semite. You're a Jew hater. It's just unbelievable. But one thing I thought of that I want you to dive into is I've heard recently that the skin banks and the organ banks in Israel are filled to the brim, despite not having a culture that does a lot of donating. Can you dig into that?
You'll catch them every now and again too, saying that they get them from other sources. And there's long been not just like conspiracy theories, but like very quality journalism on the ground of trying to source that that the organ banks are being filled from the organs of dead Palestinians.
Was there a UN investigation or report on this? Do you know?
I don't know. I've purposely not delved super deep into that one, A, because it's really dark, and B, because it's one of those ones where you're going to get met with like the top level gaslighting and propaganda to deny it.
It doesn't work anymore. We don't care.
And it's one of those ones where for now I suspect that it's a little too morbid for American people that need to understand what's going on in order for them to start there. You know what I mean?
I think that level of darkness helps us take a fierce stand.
For some people it does. And it's just even more dark when you realize that their entire medical system is funded by our taxpayer dollars. They have free healthcare in Israel, and we can hardly afford healthcare over here.
Well, I want to clarify that because I saw that, but then it occurred to me this. So we send them $3 or $4 billion a year, but most of it gets recycled back into our American arms, right?
We send them way more than $3 or $4 billion a year. We send them a base layer of like, it is codified into law that we will, without question, give them a $3 or $4 billion loan, which we will forgive. So we have no oversight over it. But then there's also this other aid package on top of it and this other aid package on top of it. So every year it's more than 3 or 4 billion by a long margin.
So it's fair to say that we are directly supporting free healthcare in Israel.
Yeah. It's not technically true to say that we pay for their entire healthcare system.
Is it fair to say, given the amount of money we are giving them, it could afford them free healthcare? Is that where people are drawing a conclusion?
That's 100% what's happening, yeah. And that's what the words I'm using are basically alluding to, is that if we weren't giving them all this aid, it seems unlikely to me that their society would be so utopic for them, because it costs a lot of fucking money to give your whole people free healthcare. It costs a lot of money to run the Iron Dome. It costs a lot of money to bomb Palestinians every month, to run those prisons, to run that surveillance state. And so it's all these types of support, which are not all direct aid. Some of them are private-public partnerships. Some of them are corporate partnerships. Those are the sorts of things that sort of subsidize the Israeli way of life. And so this is where the nuance makes it hard to pin down sometimes and makes it easy to fire back with propaganda. And that's why I try to focus on what to me looks like the most overt and the most connected to America stories, as opposed to things that sort of require a deeper understanding of Israeli politics or a deeper understanding of Israeli life, because most Americans just don't have that. Because we don't live there.
I saw an excellent exchange between Dave Smith and another very arrogant Israeli where he's like, no, you, sir, on a welfare state. And he was just laying into this guy. And I think
Dave's
every American just feels this deep in their soul. We see our own financial picture going more and more into the shitter. And then we see this weird agreement where, why are we giving you $3 or $4 billion a year without question for 20 years on end, without oversight, without being allowed to criticize or ask where it's going, it is so outrageous. And a guy like Dave is so important right now because he hits it right on the head. And I guess what that leads me to is, do you see, has the split already happened? And now if this is a chunk of ice, we're now floating away from each other, and meaning that the future generations will not partner with Israel, will not fund Israel. Is that already Has that die been
Yes.
cast? Unless, of course, they change their behavior. But
I don't think that
or do
changing
they
their
have-
behavior will help at this
do
point.
they have their tentacles in so deep that they're going to continue to influence and win over U.S. politics, or do you think it's happening and it's going to split?
This is the $1 million question right now.
3 or 4 billion a year dollar question.
Yeah, exactly. And from my perspective, the split has already more than happened, and there's nothing that's going to unsplit it except for authoritarian control and digital mass surveillance, which is exactly where they're going with it. And the other thing that I think they're going to try is another 9/11 style attack, false flag. And
it seems like they're prepping it to
they're
feel
prepping
like
it
a
with
Muslim.
Islamophobia right now.
Yeah.
And Benjamin Netanyahu said in the Knesset recently that the only way we get American support back is by Islamophobia. And we are seeing that playing out from all of the talking heads, all of the mouthpieces in America, all of the paid-for influencers.
All of a sudden, we're focusing on Dearborn heavily. We're focusing on
Yeah.
the Somalians in Minnesota heavily.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always this propaganda line of, you're probably paid by Qatar. Oh, you're a Qatari mouthpiece. Oh, you must love Muslims. Oh, you want Sharia law.
There is some truth, isn't there, that Qatar
spends a lot of money.
And it's funny now, the Israeli or Jewish voices I hear, like my guy Yitzi was telling me, you point out Israel every time, but you never look at Qatari influence.
Qatar is a great ally. Yeah, Qatar is a wonderful ally. Qatar has the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East in it.
So they actually
Israel is not our
their
ally.
mouth is.
We do not have a mutual defense agreement with Israel.
That's the other thing that drives me nuts about this arrangement is Israel never has our back when it comes to our wars or our situations. We only
And it's because they're literally not our military ally. That's why they did not send a single person to help with the global war on terror.
I mean, it seems like a very clear-cut case of a parasitic relationship.
100%.
And the other
And that's
thing
a
is,
blood libel, by the way.
to say that,
Oh, yeah. That's very much a blood libel.
hey, any IDF soldier around my weight class that wants to step in a cage fight, let's fucking
I would
do it.
pay to see
Sam
that.
Freed, you mother. Okay.
I would pay to see that.
But the thing is, these people like this will squawk at you all day, and what they cannot undo is at this point it might be thousands, but hundreds and hundreds of videos on your feed seeing kid carrying a bucket blown up, a grandma getting hit in the head by Israeli settler. Like they can't undo what we've seen. And they'll try and send some bullshit article written by a right-wing Israeli guy about, actually, no. The settler violence is not bad. And actually, the Palestinians attacked the settlers more than the settlers attacked them.
Yeah. I think they should revert to their old Hasbara tactics, which was codified into a manual in 2008, where they explicitly said they hired one of the best propagandists in the world to tell them how to do the best Israel propaganda, which they do every decade or so. And in that manual, it explicitly says how to talk about the settlements. And it basically is a long list of don't fucking talk about the settlements because they're not popular. You're never going to win the argument about the settlements because they're blatantly illegal. They're blatantly it's a losing argument. Avoid it.
Yes.
And they should really go back to that tactic. Unfortunately, they can't because the internet has information flowing freely. And that's where you start to understand the networks of control and censorship and shame and ridicule that used to surround the Israel conversation. That was essential to them maintaining this relationship. And now that has been undone, largely by Jeffrey Epstein and by October 7th, there's no putting it back. You have to destroy the entire internet. You'd have to nuke the internet in order for it to go back.
And do the Men in Black thing where
Exactly.
they kind of erase our memories.
Exactly.
If we look at some of the Republican front runners or just key Israel apologists or supporters, we got the Ted Cruz's, the Marco Rubio's, the Randy Fines, I'd love to interview Randy Fine. And actually, I just sent out a request to Ted Cruz's team too. I have no idea if they'll say yes. I'm genuinely curious to sit down with him, and I'm curious on your take on this. What is in it for a guy like that to be so bent over the table for Israel? It cannot be a good look on his home front. I mean, do you think they think that's going to help their presidential run, or do they have their finger on the pulse and they're like, ooh, am I in too deep? Like, what is going on that's motivating them, do you think?
I think it's both. I think it's the initial deal with the devil, so to speak, metaphorically saying, I think was done in an environment where it was just obvious to any political player, which are largely snakes. This is, again, with this incentive structure that incentivizes snakes getting to the top. And when you're a snake that slithers to the top, you're smart enough to realize that the power is with this faction, and so I'm with this faction. And once you're with that faction, you're swimming in waters where there's either subtle crimes that you're kind of taking part in, or there's overt blackmail being collected on you for real crimes that you're being invited to take part in as your prize for being in the club. This is like either the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, and there's a lot of angles at the Jeffrey Epstein stuff because he was only trafficking young girls. There's all kinds of young boy trafficking rings. There's a lot of gay Republican politicians that have all sorts of dirt in their closet, skeletons literally in their closet.
Yeah, there are a lot of gay Republican
Yep.
influencers out
They
there.
love the gay Republican influencers and politicians. They specifically select for them, and they have for a long time. But there's also this whole other wing of just, if you slither up there and you start doing insider trading and you start making weird deals and you start putting your signature on lines that you'd rather no one really ever sees, all of that starts to become this other subtle blackmail file as well. And you sort of get in beyond a point of no return where you're just locked into that thing from now on regardless, because you can't turn your back on it.
You're saying Israel is the one organizing and blackmailing guys like Ted Cruz into submission, or it's this shadowy Illuminati cabal that is doing? Like, who is actually...
The question is, what's the difference at this point? Because, for example, do I think that Benjamin Netanyahu personally runs all of Israel's blackmail? Not a chance, no. I think he's probably got a lot of his own on people, including Israeli people. But, no, I think that this is why understanding the Jeffrey Epstein network is so critical. And this is why it's not just Israeli politics and Israeli politicians, because Jeffrey Epstein was an American Jew. Leslie Wexner was an American Jew. A lot of his network was built out of American Jewish people. But when you just go one step up to Leslie Wexner, who is the bankroll, Leslie Wexner is the owner of L Brands, which is Abercrombie & Fitch, Hollister, Victoria's Secret, as well as Bed Bath & Body Works, a lot of companies, multi-billionaire. He's one of the largest donators to Israeli and Jewish causes in the world over the last 100 years, devoting his life to, basically his whole life is him just demonically trying to accumulate more money at any means necessary so that he can have billions of dollars, so that he can give tens and hundreds of millions to Jewish causes, Israeli causes, etc. And so when you look at him as an American Jew and his direct allegiance to Israel and the like global Jewish project that is, you realize that I no longer know what the blackmail is really. Is the blackmail coming from this American Jew that is just, doing his thing, but happens to be really good friends with Ehud Barak? Or is it coming from Israel because it's getting handed to Ehud Barak and getting stashed in a vault somewhere in Israel? And the difference sort of becomes a weird gray area where we don't know where the blackmail is. We just know that the FBI doesn't have it. And the fact that the FBI doesn't have it means that whoever was collecting it still does. And it's possible that they both have it. Who knows? But this is the thing about intelligence agencies, is they design these ultra fucked up projects. And not just in Israeli cases. Like, for example, when the CIA was smuggling heroin during Vietnam, that gets compartmentalized behind multiple layers of protection, where it's a person that's like not exactly part of the CIA who runs a company who's going to hire a person that has like a clandestine military background. So there's like, oh, if he gets caught, it doesn't really blow back on the company. And if the company gets caught, it doesn't really blow back on the bank. And if the bank gets caught, it doesn't really blow back on the CIA, because we don't fucking know anything about what's going on out there. And the Epstein network is built in the exact same way, because that's how plausible deniability is structured. And that's why I'm always talking about intelligence agencies, because we have a very clear understanding of why and how they do that through very good reporting over decades and decades of history. And when you look at the Epstein network, it's the textbook example of the exact same operation of he's just a lone pedophile just paying for massages. But then you look at his connections, you look at his funding, you look at his handling, you look at all the network around him, and you realize that, no, this is not just a lone pedophile. And you realize that, no, he doesn't have the power to protect his case after he's dead years later, and to have the DOJ pretend that they lost everything, and to have Kash Patel go completely bug-eyed on camera and like, I'm sure he wasn't blackmailing anyone.
What a wimpy and pathetic display that has been.
All I'll say is I don't know why Kash Patel lives with a man in Nevada when his girlfriend lives in Tennessee.
Tell me about that.
That's all I know.
Be careful, because there's $5 million lawsuits.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
I don't know anything. These are just wild allegations on the internet. But I would wonder if people wanted to look into where Kash Patel resides and who his roommate is, and where Alexis Wilkins resides, and why they aren't closer to each other if they love each other so much. And think about what would get Kash Patel to completely flip from the podcaster that's going to expose the deep state, going to release the Epstein files on day one, and then on day one, he's got Israel's fist all the way up his ass.
homosexuality is an extremely strong blackmail if you're not able to be open about it.
Bingo. And all you need to do is look back at the granddaddy.
And by the way, so I don't get sued, I'm not saying Cash Patel is a homosexual. I haven't
And
heard
I'm
this
not
theory
either.
yet.
I'm just saying that people on the internet have noticed weird things that we have questions about. But if you go back to the granddaddy of sexual blackmail in the video age, it's J. Edgar Hoover, and it's the original FBI. And when you look at J. Edgar Hoover, you realize that he and Roy Cohn and a bunch of the people right next to him were instrumental in stoking what was called the Lavender Scare, which during the Cold War...
Roy Cohn, Trump's mentor, was connected to J. Edgar Hoover?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
He was organizing all the parties at the Blue Suite in the Plaza Hotel.
Really?
Roy Cohn knows everything about the founding of the blackmail industry, and he knows all about the blackmail networks, and he knows all about how to wire this shit up with cameras, and I'm just guessing, probably told Trump a little bit about it. But those guys were instrumental in what was called the Lavender Scare, which was during the Cold War. They stoked the fear of homosexual people in the government because they'll be blackmailed by the commies. And the fucked up irony is that they were both homosexual, and Hoover was into cross-dressing homosexual parties, sex orgies, and they were actually the ones being blackmailed by the Jewish mob at the time. Well, Cohn was on that team, I think, suspect. But it was these blackmailed gay men that were stoking the fear of gay men in the government, because when it's more taboo to be gay in the government, the blackmail actually gets stronger, because then it becomes more taboo to come out as being gay if you're in the government. Do you see what I'm saying? So it becomes this self-perpetuating cycle.
It feels like the being outed as gay only works on right-wing people.
Yes.
And it's interesting. I mean, we have emerging right-wing figures. We have when the Republican convention comes to town and Grindr crashes. It's just very funny when it seems like sometimes the people that are most outwardly anti-gay, it's like, oh.
Bingo. You want to put something else together here?
Huh.
You know how Jeffrey Epstein, like, not entirely. There's a lot of Republicans that he associated with too. Mm-hmm. But you know how it's like there is some ammunition for the Republicans to say that he was mostly targeting Democrats, mm-hmm. and he was mostly blackmailing Democrats. Well, Jeffrey Epstein was a purveyor of young girls, right? And if the Republican Party is staffed with a whole bunch of gay men, they're going to a different service provider for their blackmail material. And Jeffrey Epstein is providing the blackmail that works on the other crowd. If
the average person in the population, let's say the average population, is 3% gay. I think that's the relatively the statistic. Is it that much higher, you think, in the Republican Party, or you think they're just that much more afraid of admitting it in that 3%?
I suspect it's higher. I suspect it's probably double, at least 6%, possibly much higher. But it's basically all rumor mill. There's not a lot of like ironclad exposure of it or reporting on it. And even when it is, like if one person gets some strong reporting, or for example, like a year ago, 2 years ago, this photo goes viral of someone nailing it like another dude on the table inside of like the Pentagon or something. I forget where it was.
That's a real photo?
Yeah, it's a real photo. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was like the staffer or something, and he like released it himself because he thought it was awesome. But like even when something like that happens, like that's located to that person's career, that moment in time, and only like 4 years later, that person might not even be there anymore. So there's never really a moment when we have like exposure on the whole window into how many of these people are being blackmailed or are even just gay in the first place. So we don't really know unless you're really tied into the politics, tied into the networks. And I didn't have to get very deep into like the TPUSA world, for example. I went to one conference and I heard rumor after rumor after rumor about what happens at the hotels at night at a TPUSA TPUSA event. Yeah. And I don't know if there's any truth to them, but based upon where the rumors are coming from and based upon how ubiquitous they are, and there are people that have been in this world for a long time, that like people that we all know, that as in the people telling me are people that have been in this world for a long time that we all know, like they're very well represented journalists. That's the kind of thing where it's like, there's probably a little bit of truth to that.
Do you think the Republican Party would just benefit by saying it's okay to be gay more? Like, because I think as far as issues facing us in this country, the fact that some right-wing people fixate on that, to me, it's such a non-issue as far as rental, affordability, housing, healthcare. Like those are the things that are really going to change
agree.
people's lives.
Yeah.
I just find it interesting that we get sidetracked with that sometimes.
I suspect that it is because of the blackmail networks. I suspect it's the modern day lavender scare, where the blackmail networks themselves are the ones responsible for stoking that vibe in general. Because if that vibe goes away, a lot of your blackmail goes away. And a lot of your hold on people starts to slip. And so that's why I brought up J. Edgar Hoover, is because that was the quintessential instance of the blackmail networks feeding the power of their blackmail network by stoking that fear. And that's still true today. And that's why you wind up with pedophile trafficking rings, because that's a blackmail that never goes away. And like, over my dead body is that stigma going away. And I would fucking hope that regardless if you're left or right, there's no moment in time where your average American will ever be like, yeah, let's entertain the conversation that having sex with children is like an acceptable thing to talk about.
You're going to give my editors a lot to work with here, but I 100% agree. One thing that occurred to me just a little earlier on that I wanted to touch on was, if we were to say, hey, this Muslim American that's really tapped in with Saddam Hussein, he's really tapped in with Osama bin Laden, no one would blink an eye. If a Christian guy was involved in something weird with the Pope or the Vatican, you'd be allowed to say that. But isn't it interesting that I think we're getting rid of this, but we feel like we have to pump the brakes when it's like this American Jewish guy is connected to this Israeli.
Do you have to do that around anything except for Judaism?
It doesn't feel like it.
And that's because they've multiplied their propaganda budget times 20.
I guess the thing is that I do want to ask about friendly fire, though, because I wonder how many Jewish Americans out there that are genuinely worried about anti-Semitism, real anti-Semitism. They have no part to play in the Epstein files. How you balance it, where we are allowed to criticize bad Jewish actors, but it doesn't turn into innocent Jewish people getting targeted. I think part of it would be if the right people were held accountable and it wasn't gaslighted, then the wrong energy wouldn't be directed at the wrong person.
Exactly. It's an uncomfortable conversation, and I don't necessarily have the right answer. I just have my perspective, and my perspective comes from teaching, and it largely comes from watching how kids bully each other, and it's because we're just all big fucking kids, and adults engage in the exact same behavior as kids, just in a more advanced way. And when a bully bullies someone and they get a rise out of it, they keep doing it. But when a bully bullies someone and they're unflapped, that person becomes cool. That person becomes cooler than the bully. And the bully actually loses all their power. And I feel like Jewish people have been gaslit and tricked into taking the stance of the victim over and over and over, not realizing that actually you're perpetuating your position. And I don't mean to say that there's no anti-Semitism. I don't mean to say that there's no legitimate issue going on there. What I mean to say is that I think, and obviously I'm stepping in from way on the outside of that. I'm not a Jewish person. I've not been persecuted like that. But I think that Jewish people would have a far healthier relationship with the world and with their own identity and culture. Well, elements of their culture. If you were more like Dave Smith and just were an individual, call it out. Say, don't feel beholden to your tribe in the way that you have to endorse a foreign government.
Cut out the dirty infection that's
exactly
the Bibi Netanyahus of the world, the Ben Gavirs of the world. Yeah. You have to cut that infection out of your arm and repair it, and the body will be fine again.
And genuinely, I do mean, I think that Jewish people would be far better off in this world if they stopped being sensitive to Jew jokes. Not because Jew jokes are never malicious or never have animosity behind them. Sometimes they often do. But because when you meet someone that can laugh at the joke about themselves, you're like, dude, this guy's cool, man. I like this person. They've got a good sense of humor. They're not fucking sensitive. They're chilling. And and inherently there's this relationship where if the natural response of an American Jew that has nothing to do with this shit, which is most of them, if their natural response is to squeeze up and to try to defend Israel and defend Jewish people and defend the whole thing, they've just inadvertently defended Jeffrey Epstein, and they've just inadvertently defended bombing children, and they've inadvertently defended all these evil, corrupt acts
that are
they actually make it look like there is a Jewish conspiracy. They make it, that essentially is the Jewish conspiracy, because the Jewish conspiracy is not that people think that there's some secret Rothschild Jew that's sending out an email that's we're all going to say this thing now. The Jewish conspiracy is that when you have the tightest racial group of any racial group in the world, and you're all bound by the tightest, oldest religious culture in the world, and the religious identity of that culture is that we have been persecuted forever, so we always have to stick together above everything else, that actually perpetuates the cycle. You will always be the outsider in another country because you've put yourself in that position of being an outsider because your identity is to each other first and not to your fellow countrymen first. And so there's this uncomfortable balancing that is not my job to decide what Jewish people should do. It's Jewish people's job to decide what they should do. I'm just talking about like the physics of human relationships, that if you're going to be more tightly knit to Jewish people than you are going to be to your fellow countrymen, to your neighbor down the street in like downtown Atlanta or wherever you live, then you're inherently going to be like an outsider in this land. But if you completely go the other way, then your Jewish identity will kind of evaporate. And so there's some sort of middle ground that I think Jewish people are all coming to grips with, where they have to decide, like, am I going, because let's be real, if you're a Jewish person in one of these tight Jewish communities and you speak up against Benjamin Netanyahu, you might be ostracized. You very well could be called a self-hating Jew, a traitor, a fucking all sorts of horrible names.
I heard Norman Finkelstein called an anti-Semite, which I thought was hilarious.
Oh, yeah. No, Jewish people that step out against like this global Judaism thing, they're the ones that get the most heat of anybody. And so I like that's very real. And that should be a signal that this is something far worse than like we're being persecuted. This is political propaganda. It's emotional blackmail. It's identity blackmail. And just like Islam needs to step into the modern world and fucking forget about stoning women and forget about all this bullshit that's in their books, like in the back end of their books, Jewish people need to do the exact same thing. Christian people need to do the exact same thing. These religions were born in ancient times with ancient laws, with ancient people that were retarded. And there's a lot of good shit in those books, but you can't live by the book as though it's like 1200 like AD. It's not. It's 2025, and your neighbor is a Muslim, and your neighbor is Chinese, and your neighbor is like all these other things, but they're all American, right? And we need to all get along, and we need to all get each other's differences and have a little bit of respect and try to solve Americans' problems. Or you can move to the country where your loyalty lies and solve the problems there.
A couple of years ago, we got to travel to both Dearborn, Michigan for Ramadan, and we got to travel to Crown Heights, New York for Purim, if you're familiar with that Jewish holiday where it's like the one day of the year.
I mean, I'm not deeply familiar with either, but...
And what I think is they have much more in common than they would like to admit. Yeah. The hospitality we saw, the close family units we saw, the generosity we saw in both of those communities, to me, it was some of the more lighthearted, fun videos we've gotten to film. Yep. And I don't know if I'll ever be invited back to another Purim. I know that the Muslims will invite me to Ramadan, given my recent coverage of Israel, but I do think the Jewish culture in America has a lot of underrated things about them, like even the food. I don't think there's any Jewish restaurants that I've never been to a city and been like, eat at that Jewish restaurant. I don't even know if it exists.
Go to Florida, dude. They got some banging Jewish restaurants in Florida. I think that the restaurant we went to last night might have been Jewish.
It was impeccable.
Yeah, amazing food.
When I was in Crown Heights, we would bounce into these gorgeous homes, eat some of the best food. We just gorged ourselves. Mm-hmm. And also, one thing I really do appreciate about Jewish culture is the intellectual aspect of it, where it seemed like everyone at the table we were sitting at, they knew their shit, they were readers, they knew things front and back. And so I think there's a lot to admire there.
Well, you know what is really good at doing that, regardless of which culture you're in, is having a strong religious familial identity. Is when you grow up in a community where you're deeply tied to your ancestors, deeply tied to your family, you have a strong religious bound around you that dictates your morality, you're far less likely to go and drink with your boys all night and waste your life through all of your 20s, and you're far more encouraged in a Jewish community to go into, this field and that field, to go to school, to go to this, because when you're connected to your lineage and your ancestors, when you have a strong identity of I'm a part of something that stretches back thousands of years, you're inclined to do your best to stretch it, 100 more years into the future. But when you're an American that's just a part of a melting pot that like, don't even talk about your fucking identity, you white supremacist or whatever it is. And I'm being a little facetious here. But when you're raised in this like disconnected single slice of your world, and you're just an American, and you don't whatever it's, and this is how I was raised, is I have no understanding of my ancestors until I started to get curious for myself. You're far more nihilistic. You're far more prone to throwing your life away. You're far more prone to not understanding all the greatness that's in front of you and not being encouraged and held accountable to doing that. And so it's no mystery that Jewish people are extremely successful and they're extremely intelligent, and they, as communities, they tend to push themselves into advanced fields and advanced success because that's what religion and these kind of community connections do. And that's why it's such a tragedy that so much of American culture has lost that as we've kind of strayed into the 1900s and 2000s. And now we're all just hoe culture, gangster culture, like just really sad, degenerate cultures.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at old Western civilization culture, there's these the most beautiful churches were built.
Yep.
The architecture was phenomenal. The family structure was great. And now we've kind of descended into strip mall America, where we've lost our religion. Everything is gray walls and basic architecture. And I think there's a big resurgence back to religion. And part of me wishes I was more religious, but I read the Old Testament. I really struggle with it. I mean, that to me is a very hard read. The New Testament keeps me open to it. Mm-hmm. Although this is just a religious tangent I'll give you, but I'm very frustrated by Jesus in the New Testament in this sense that we only see very small parts of his life. We see his birth. We see a chapter where he goes to teach in the temple and disappears and they can't find him. And then from 12 to 30
years,
we have no idea what did Jesus, when he went through puberty, what was that like?
There's ideas. They're just not in the Bible.
So were there books that were deleted?
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's all sorts. So there, and I mean, I'll get
read
so
this?
much hate for talking about it.
I can read this though?
Yeah. I think most people call them the Gnostic texts, but basically, and I am not an expert at this, but my understanding is that at the beginning of the foundational years of Christianity, from like 0 to 500 AD, was when all these different books were getting disseminated, and there was all these different like Christian churches and cults essentially being born around his teachings, and they had wildly different, many of them very pagan belief systems, as each different group was taking in his teachings and kind of combining them with their own like original culture. And then around the Council of Nicaea, and people will argue about this till the end of days, they did some version of either we all already agree that these are the right books, so those ones are wrong, or it was the Roman Empire being like, these are the books that we're going to choose to control the masses. And it's probably a gray area somewhere in between. But there's a lot of people, like even like on TikTok, that devote their whole platforms to talking about these Gnostic texts, talking about the books that were banned, talking about the books that were only preserved in these faraway places.
And are these books I can buy on Amazon or read a PDF?
You should follow Gnostic Informant on TikTok and Instagram. He's super cool. His name's Neil. I would love to sit down and talk to him. And he I don't understand how he arrives at atheism from his perspective, because he's super read into all of these different texts. He's like the what's the Wes guy? Wes. He went on Joe Rogan. He's got the really clipped like Mormon looking blonde haircut. He's talked some shit about me because he like was correcting my takes, but I love him. He's cool. And Gnostic Informant is sort of like him for I don't believe in Christianity because of all these ancient texts. And he's like, I believe in Christianity because I read all the ancient texts. But yeah, there's all sorts. So for me, I've actually gotten more and more religious the more I dig into researching. And I've actually kind of swung back around to religion because of, if you read enough into sort of like esoteric science and into like advanced scientific questions right now that we're grappling with about like where consciousness comes from, about AI, about all those things. For me, it swung me right back into religion, and then learning about history and conspiracy theories and ancient religion. It all starts to come back into like religion can rebud out of a deep understanding of the complexity of it all, rather than like a narrowing of your mind to just believe this, you stupid peasant. And I'm not saying that like most Christians are believe this, you stupid peasant, but for a lot of history, I think that was the mindset of just like, shut up, this is the book of our land, obey this or else we'll kill you. Like I'm talking like 1000. There's a lot of eras where all the different religions were used to control people. And now I think there's a resurgence of realization that religion plays a deeply important role in the human experience. And there's a lot of ways to come to it other than just it was given to you by your parents.
Ian, maybe I want to end here with you, which is, I think for both of us, we're extremely lucky that we're in a field that we're passionate about. Like, it doesn't feel like a job. We spend so many hours a week chasing this. But I am curious, like, is there anything you want to tell the audience about who is the Ian Carroll when the camera's not on? What are you up to? What are you doing? What occupies you?
I mean, it's really the exact same thing as when the camera is on. I
Is
spend
there,
all day doing this, but there is a lesson in that, in that it would be like the low hanging like podcast fruit to be like, so you should fucking start a pod. No, I'm not saying start a podcast. I'm not saying that everyone should be what I do, but everyone should be learning something every day. Everyone should be using their brain and expanding their mind and expanding their capability every day. And I think that we live in a world where, like you were saying about the strip mall, the American degeneracy of this like modern culture, this sadness, this nihilism, that's bred and born out of having nowhere to go and having no destination and having no future and no hope. And the solution to that is making your own. And you make your own by expanding yourself more and more and more and more. And at first, usually, at least for me, what it was is you don't really know what you're expanding towards. You just know that you need to grow.
And then the path emerges.
Yeah, if you're not growing, you're dying. But the moment you start growing, the path takes shape because you're taking shape. Because the more you grow, the more you become yourself. And so just get interested in shit and just learn and ask questions. And we live in the most information-free world ever. And if you just start taking your free time to grow your brain and spirit and body instead of to waste your time and consume brain rot and just be nihilistic and eat junk food, you'll grow into whoever you're supposed to be. And we need people that are full, active, alive humans to bring our country back to life. And that only comes when us as Americans and us as people come back to life.
We should live like we are on an absolute mission and hungry to get up, excited to learn, excited to take action. I think that's where you uncover what you're here on earth to do.
100%.
Mr. Ian Carroll, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Tommy.
Toodaloo.
Toodles!